Hi there, this is Guðlaug Svala. Although my knitting name is GK Dóttir, a reference to the Icelandic custom of us women being called daughters of our fathers. So my name is Kristjánsdóttir. But actually the name just got invented because of problems with usernames in Gmail, since the first ones I tried were already in use. So I ended up with GK Dóttir, which then became my username for a lot of other stuff. Ravelry, Instagram. So now my knitting name is GK Dóttir. I was asked a while ago to make slow TV, that I should do slow TV with my knitting. You know, the slow TV, at least I think it began more or less with a Norwegian broadcast of a ferry, the Hurtigruten, just out sailing around the fjords of Norway. And it's strangely fascinating to see something happening very slow. This one is called Mia. I just figured that this would be a good time to make a slow TV because I have all the necessary ingredients. I have my knitting, I have my tea, I have my cat, one of them at least. She's actually lying on a woolen knitted sweater, which is very appropriate. It's easy to find those in my house, they're everywhere. So what I'm knitting currently is made from Icelandic wool. It's not the unspun, but yeah, it's a single I'll remember later what it's called, but it's hand dyed. I really love doing hand dyed fibers, and this one is comes from an artist actually, or craftswoman, who sews and studies the Icelandic traditional women's and men's costumes, and she every summer or fall she dyes a batch of woolen thread to use in decorative sewing on the hems and on the dresses. And being at least that's how I understand it, she needs to boil up a lot of dye, maybe rhubarb, it may be indigo, birch, different kinds of Icelandic herbs and imported colors. And she doesn't want to waste the water with the color in, so she throws in extra types of yarn just to use the color, and this has led her to accumulate a lot of wool. So I'm now I got the chance to play with her yarns and her dyeing, not her dyeing, but dyeing. So I've been just trying different things. Some of the colors are variegated, others are semi-solids, and as you can see, they're beautiful. The Icelandic wool is a bit coarse, and it's not something you would normally. I can just wear it very close to my skin, but not everyone. So this one, I'm currently making a cardigan. You can see that it has a steek in the middle, but it's actually a remake of a different design that I made, which is sort of how do you say, vintage 50s inspired thing. That it's a top, and this is much softer wool. This is a merino blend of some kind, also hand dyed by Icelandic. At least the variegated is hand dyed in Iceland. This one is not, but as you can see, I'm pretty colorful, and you can see that also on my designs on Ravelry and on Instagram, that I do a lot of lively colors and patterns. And I also pick up patterns from nature and from houses and from things that I see and I like. So I've been, for the last year or so, I've been knitting butterflies, patterns based on butterfly wings, and I've also been knitting a few patterns based on house decorations. I'm actually finishing one of those these days. Yeah, but this is not supposed to be so much a talking slow TV, but knitting. So I guess I'd better get on with the knitting. This is a needle size 1.5 US, 2.5 millimeters, and I'm going to pick up the neck line for the neck hem. And I'm doing what we here call pearl knitting, which is ribbing with where you switch the knit and the pearl. Is it moss knitting? I think we call it pearls. Much more fancy for Icelanders to have pearls than moss. The moss is everywhere. Yeah, so I'm just gonna pick up this is a top-down pattern. So I started just with the main color and with a bigger needle, but now I'm gonna pick up and I think I'm gonna go with the red one. So I'm picking up stitches from the cast on. And this is more or less where I sit when I get a chance to be home alone knitting, which is a lot of the time actually. I sit by a big window. This is sort of a rebuilt balcony. They added windows to it, and so I can see. I'm on the second floor, maybe first floor in some countries. So I'm the first above the ground floor, and I have a lovely view of old houses in the old center of Hafnarfjörður. Yeah, so on we go with the picking up of all the stitches. And I think I'm just going to do, I have to go back and check. I think there's no decrease going on here, just a straight, yeah. There's no decrease between. So I'll just pick them up as I go and knit a few rows of moss. And I'll start with the necklining and then I'll go to the front borders. So this is sort of an experiment, this video. I might move on to trying something like Instagram Live, which I've never done, or other kinds of direct feeds, maybe. We'll see how it goes. So here in Iceland we do is it called continental? I think. The knitting where you hold the thread on the left and knit with your right hand. I think that's it's probably the most practical one and the most ergonomic way of knitting. There's less moving involved. Burns less calories though, maybe, but gets the work done quicker and more effectively. That's actually was something that was my goal since I was just a little girl watching women knit and starting to knit myself. I think here in Iceland we have we get taught arts and crafts at school, and we get taught to knit and sew and crochet, as well as woodwork and painting. But I have the women around me, my aunts, my mom, my grandmothers, have all been knitters, and my sister. So I grew up watching people knit, mostly women, and I've always had this drive to make things and create things and work with my hands. And actually I'm a physical therapist, but for years I was always thinking, how can I arrange my life in such a way that I can just knit, that I can just stop, ditch the day job and move on to just knitting. And in my mind that was a very unrealistic dream, because who knits for a living? Mostly that would involve knitting woolen sweaters for tourists in Iceland, which is not something that I found very attractive. But having a lifelong dream somehow pushes you into, if you don't let go of it, it will evolve over time. And I started designing accidentally. I didn't know that I could. Of course, I had knitted some things that I just looked at something and tried to imitate it, but really making and writing designs was something that I hadn't really thought about. But then I fell ill 3 years ago. Yeah, I went into a massive burnout and I couldn't read and I couldn't walk. So I did what I could, which was Actually, knitting was a bit too complicated, so I did a lot of crochet. I think I became sort of motion sick when I was reading or trying to focus my eyes on something. It made me queasy, but the crocheting was okay. And since I couldn't look at, I couldn't read a pattern, I just started making things that just came from somewhere inside of me. And as I improved, I moved over to knitting, and also at the same time the top-down method of knitting sort of opened my eyes to how you can work with you know, knitting from the bottom up involves that you make a body and then you make a sleeve, and then you have to make sure that both fit together to combine into the yoke. And that's a sort of more, it's a less intuitive way of knitting, I think. But the top down, where you just begin and you go and then you divide it and then you keep going, it helps you just work your way through the composition of the garment. So by doing top-down knitting, the designing sort of just opened up. And for me, it's mostly about how do you say, proportions. It's about proportions, you know, what are the proportions between the body and the sleeve. I use percentages, and so that helps me grade my patterns. And with trial and error, I've figured out a few yoke designs where I can have a fixed amount of stitches that I can then design patterns onto, graphic patterns. So yeah, here I am knitting, and I've been publishing some patterns and doing a few commissions, and I am this is not helping me to quit my day job. I'm not earning very much from the knitting, but I jokingly I joke that like people who are, you know, selling drugs to feed their own addiction, I sell knitting patterns to be able to buy more wool. So it finances my addiction, keeps me stocked. But yeah, I was talking about the continental knitting, or our way of knitting, and my dream of being a fast knitter. I think I'll make another video on that work later, on how I practiced being faster, because I really admired the knitters that could knit very fast, and I went on to experiment with how that could be done. And this started when I was very little, but it's kept on evolving, and also being a physical therapist, which involves a lot of studies on how you use your body, your limbs, your muscles, your joints, and ergonomics, that has also fed into the same process of being an ergonomic and fast or productive knitter. Of course it can't, you cannot allow it to impact the quality of your work. Being fast is not worth it if it turns out that you're doing sloppy work. But why make two big movements or too many movements to get the same thing done as you can do with less and smaller movements? I went through school knitting from the age of like 16 and on. I would bring my needles to class and knit. There was maybe one teacher who didn't like it and told me to put my knitting away. Those were very difficult classes because I had difficulty focusing on the class if I couldn't knit at the same time. I knit my way through university, through the classes, although of course you can't knit when you're doing practical stuff in physiotherapy, when you're practicing, when you have to use your hands in what you're doing. But the lecture stuff all involved knitting. I've later learned that this is a stim, stimming, if you know that concept, mostly talked about in relation to autism, but everyone stims, although I am autistic, which I didn't know until also 3 years ago. But stimming is a way to calm your nervous system, and knitting is an ingenious way of stimming for autistics, because you can work around the issue of eye contact, because when I'm knitting, I'm looking at my knitting, so I don't have to worry about if I'm looking enough or little enough or in the right way at somebody that I'm talking to, or if I'm looking you in the eyes or not, which is often an issue in autistic communication. Shouldn't be an issue, but neurotypicals are that way. And it also helps me keep my hands busy. If I didn't knit, I would be biting my nails, which is another stim. And I would also be playing with my hair a lot, which is another stim. I would be cracking my knuckles a lot, which is another stim. So keeping me occupied with the knitting is actually just a good thing. And also, this refers to more than just autism. It refers to all neurodiversity, also ADHD, that we have this different kinds of attention, and neurodivergent people have a different perception. So we keep noticing details in our surroundings, and that may be quite distracting, because I would be looking at the birds outside, and I would be counting some lines in the wall or whatever, and this sort of environmental attention draws from the focused attention on what I'm doing. So if I sort of harness or bind my environmental attention into the knitting, then my mind can focus completely on, for example, what the teacher is saying or what I have to be learning at any given time. So the one teacher that asked me to put my knitting away because it was disturbing, he was wrong. And that's just his loss, or the loss for German studies. But for all the rest of them that just allowed me to knit, they were helping. Okay, so now I've moved on to the knit and purl, the first row of the moss stitch, the purly stitch. And I think I'll make maybe 10 rows, 10 to 12 of the ribbing. Sorry. Here I have one, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then the bind off. So yeah, 10 to 12. 27 minutes into the slow TV. So I've been thinking about these slow TV knitting videos, and if you're wondering, Mia is still there. She just turned. I've been thinking about some subjects to do. One of them will be how to knit fast and effectively, and the story behind that journey. I think another one will be on the physiotherapist knitting, how to keep your shoulders relaxed, how to breathe correctly how to prevent hyperventilation while working with your hands. These are two subjects that I've already thought of, and I think they might actually be quite helpful. That is, if you are interested in knitting fast, and also if you're interested in not getting your shoulders tight or muscle aches from knitting. So this is, I'm working, I am working not in the round but flat, because this is a cardigan. So I work it front and back. And I'm excited to see how it turns out, because it's, as you can see, it's very light and very lofty material, so it doesn't have a gravity pull. So I'll have to block it before I see the final look, if it will be like bulky to the sides or hang more down. But the thought behind the design is that it's sort of a vintage. It has a certain width, and then it has a long, pretty tight ribbing at the bottom, and it's also quite cropped or short, so vintage, 50s. Inspired by scrolling through Pinterest and looking for vintage knits, 50s and 60s. The good thing about Pinterest that you can always just scroll on or dive. It's a rabbit hole. It just, you find something you like, click on that, and then you see more of that, and you click and click and click and click. And this, when you're looking for ideas for designs, this helps you build sort of an internal lookbook, maybe, or inspiration. So that's also the origin of the lace pattern alternated with straight knitting, stockinette. This is a common feature of the 50s vintage tops. They have this striped appearance very often, and quite a lot of lace patterns also. Sometimes the whole garment is in lace, sometimes the lace comes in stripes, as in this one. And I will show you later, I will show you the sweaters that I've already done with the wool from Enrique, from the dyer. I've done, this is the fourth. And it's a play of colors, of course, because it's quite colorful, quite rich in colors. And there are two thicknesses, or one of them is sort of two weights of yarn. There's this, this is more or less lace. It's a bit less than fingering, I think. And then the other one is, I'll show you a hand-dyed one. This is the Létt Lopi, which is, I think, Aran maybe, or sort of like DK maybe. So this has been in the project. I've done two with heavier weight, and then two with a the lighter one. Yeah, so I think maybe this is enough slow TV for now. We'll see where this goes, if it goes anywhere. So I will put my Instagram and my Ravelry handles at the bottom of the video, and would really love if you could visit those, which would also be a way to communicate better. And then of course I will come back. I have to sneeze. Sorry. I will come back to you with a finished object. When this is done, it will definitely appear on Instagram and maybe in Ravelry, depending on how well it turns out. And if I have the I have a backlog of a lot of patterns that I still have to write. It's much more fun for me at least, to just knit and produce. And I would love to be able to just, like this one is more than a year old and it's never been written up. If I could just throw it at someone and say, okay, write this one in 7 different sizes, please. And then of course the test knitting and all that process takes much more time than just to sit and knit, which at the end of the day is what I love to do. So until next time, maybe. Bye.